Guys, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our iOS development with UIKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can ensure that our keyboard does not obscure a text field that we're typing in. Now, this is a very common issue that you'll see on, for example, Stack Overflow and the Apple developer forums and the Swift forums and all over the internet. So I felt it necessary to cover it in this series, so there is an actual place to look to for a video demonstration on how to fix this problem. Now, there are many ways of solving this particular problem, but the simplest way begins with embedding your content in a scroll view, which I have here. I have a large UI stack view in the vertical orientation that has a bunch of label and text field views inside of it. Now, label and text field view is a custom UI view that I created, which has a very simple user interface. It's as simple as having a horizontally oriented UI stack view with a text field and a label inside of it. It's literally that simple. So we've got what is in effect a VStack, right? A vertical UI stack view with a bunch of horizontal UI stack views stacked on top of each other. This is a very common UI pattern when you're dealing with forms in UIKit apps, when you're not putting them into UI table view cells. So it's a relatively practical example here. Now, in the starter application that I have here, whenever you my goodness, excuse me. When you tap on a text field, especially towards the bottom of the at the bottom of the scroll view, or the view without a scroll view, the text field gets covered by the keyboard, and that's not exactly what you want. So when this happens, there are a few changes that need to be made. In this example, what we're going to do is we're going to change the bottom anchor constraint of our scroll view to be constrained to the top anchor of our view controller's views keyboard layout guide. Now, what this will do is this will ensure that the scroll view will always grow and shrink in accordance with the keyboard whenever it appears or hides itself after assigning first responder status in a text field. All right. So, that is sort of the beginning of what we're going to do here, but that only solves half the problem. The other half of the problem is the text field that we're editing still isn't in view because our scroll view wouldn't be scrolled down to that text field. So how do we solve that? Well, scroll view has a method for this conveniently that allows us to scroll down to a point where where a given rectangle of a view will be visible. My goodness, excuse me, I'm so sorry. So, with that should solve our problem. And when solving this problem, we're going to be learning a few new concepts. So, let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use the keyboard layout guide. Now, it's used exactly the same as the safe area layout guide we've used previously. So in Xcode, we can go to where we specify our constraints. And where we have scrollView.bottomAnchor.constraint. And we're setting it equal to the bottom anchor of the view. Go ahead and get rid of bottom anchor here. And we'll say view.keyboard keyboard layout guide dot top anchor. And that is our constraint for the bottom anchor of our scroll view setup. Now you could instead of doing it this way, where it's always constrained to the top anchor of the keyboard layout guide, one thing you can do is when you listen for a notification, which we'll take a look at how to do in a moment, you could switch the constraint around to where if the keyboard is shown, use a constraint stored in a variable where you constrain it to the keyboard's layout guide. Otherwise, constrain it to the bottom anchor of the view. So if it disappears, and by default, have it be constrained to the bottom anchor of the view. Now, this would require that you manually store the return value of the constraint method on any given anchor in a variable for both scenarios, and then activate and deactivate those constraints using the isActive property accordingly. We're not going to use that method of solving this problem, but I urge you to at least try it because it does work. All right. So now that we have our bottom anchor for our scroll view constrained, the next thing is we need to listen for the right notifications. Now, if you want to listen for the for when the keyboard shows up and when it disappears for the other mentioned constraint method, then you'll have to listen for two notifications. But in this instance, with the method we're using, we only need to listen to one notification, and that is keyboard did show. And this notification pretty much just gets fired off exactly as the name implies when the keyboard shows itself. There's also keyboard will show, keyboard did hide, keyboard will hide, and then there's a couple others as well, such as notification did or will change frame. So those events fire off when the keyboard will or did change its frame, respectively. Those are two different notifications, not one, by the way. And then there's a few others, but we're not going to worry about them. You could experiment with them if you would like, but we're not going to do that in this video. So, above where we have our activate method call, we'll say notification center dot default dot add observer, and then do the first method that is here with the observer, the selector, the name, and the object. Now, let's talk a little bit about this before we fill in the add observer call. What is notification center? Because we're using this here to observe a notification. Well, the notification center object is an object that allows you to listen for notifications on a system basis or a view-specific basis, because some views may fire off notifications when certain things change that you can listen to. A common example when you're dealing with accessibility is listening for different notification settings to change and then adapting your user interface accordingly. So, for example, reduce motion. If reduce motion gets enabled and you listen for that notification, you can then make sure that animations are either reduced or disabled entirely, depending on what you want to do. Right? So, Notification Center is a very, very powerful object. I urge you to read the documentation to get an even better idea of how it works and what you can do with it. All right. So, the first thing that we're going to do inside of this add observer method is specify the object that is going to observe for this notification that we're going to specify. In this case, we want this view controller to observe any incoming notifications. So we'll say self. Now, selector, what method do we want to execute when this notification actually occurs? So I have a method already for this. And it's going to be keyboard appeared, like that. Next is the name of the notification. Now, this notification that we're listening to is can be accessed by using UI responder. So it's a static property of UI responder. UI responder dot, and we want keyboard did show notification, and then we have object. This should be set to nil. All right, and so now what will happen is down below, this method will get executed. But right now, no code is being run inside of this method. So let's go ahead and change that. The first thing that we need to do inside of this method is we need to get all of the arranged subviews of our vertically oriented UI stack view. And we can do that by saying let subviews equals stack dot arranged subviews. Now, arranged subviews on UI stack view is an array of UI view. So we need to cast each object inside of our subviews constant to the label and text field view type as we loop through these. So let's go ahead and say for subview in subviews. So for every subview that we have, we want to say if let subview equals subview as question mark label and text field view. But we should not we should not have our opening and closing curly braces quite yet. Next, we want another statement to be executed here. Not only do we want to safely unwrap this cast to label and text field view, if it's possible, we also want to test for a condition. This condition will be executed if you're familiar with how if-let syntax works here, this second expression with a comma separating it from the first one will execute only if the first expression is not nil. So if it's nil, this expression will never be executed. So we'll say we want to make sure that the text field inside of this label and text field subview, we want to see if it's the first responder. Now, how do we see if something is the first responder? Well, you know how at the beginning of this series, when I talked about dismissing the keyboard with a button and a toolbar on the keyboard? Well, much like we have resign first responder as a method to tell the text field, hey, you should no longer accept input, we can use the is first responder property on a view to determine whether or not it is the view that's receiving user input. So we can say subview dot text field dot is first responder. Now I'm going to put these two expressions on separate lines just so we have a little bit more room to work with. All right, so I'm going to align these. All right. Actually, yeah, let's just leave it as is, like that. All right. Then we can open up the body of our if-let. Inside of the body of our if statement here, we know that 1, we were able to successfully cast to label and text field view, and 2, that the current text field of the current subview is the first responder. So if that is the case, we need to say scroll view dot scroll rect to visible. This is the method inside of UI scroll view that allows us to make sure that a given rect is in view of in view of the user. This will make sure in particular that it is just above the keyboard so we can see what we're typing. Alright, so the first parameter is what CG rect do we want to make sure is visible. So in here, we'll simply pass it subview dot frame. Second, we need to pass whether or not this process should be animated. And we'll say true for now. If you want, you can set this to false, especially if something like reduce motion is enabled. And before we go on, you probably are getting slightly annoyed by my mention of accessibility, and that I completely get that, but it is fundamental. And if you don't get this stuff right, people aren't going to use your apps. Okay? So I'm going to continue emphasizing accessibility because it is important. And by the way, little plug here, but if you want to dive deeper into accessibility, I have a 20 video series on my channel diving into making accessible apps for Apple platforms. But we don't just cover UIKit in that series. We also cover accessibility in AppKit and SwiftUI. So there's something for everybody in that series. All right. Let's go ahead, and we should be able to run our view now. We should be able to run our code now because everything is in order. Let's go ahead and change the run destination to a simulator. So toolbar. Okay, iPhone 16 Pro Max. We'll save this. Alright, now the simulator is booting up. You just gotta give it some time. Because it does have to load all of, it has to load everything that we have. Okay, so here we are. Our app is loaded. I'm gonna go all the way down here to the bottom where we have our card security code field. Let's go ahead and tap that. Normally, this text field should be obscured by the keyboard. Let's see, is it working? I cannot tell if it's working or not. We can also run this on my phone. I would have liked to have avoided that, but the simulator seems to be giving me some problems. So let's go ahead and run this on my phone, as much as I would have liked to have avoided it. All right. All right. I'm gonna. All right. Okay, cool. The app is loading. Now I'm going to screen mirror here for you guys. All right. And we're going to screen mirror to my Mac. Okay. So here's our application. It's still trying to load everything. I'm going to turn off voiceover here so it's not annoying while we're doing this. Okay, so here's everything. If we go ahead and tap on one of these text fields towards the bottom of the screen, and we summon that text field, or the keyboard, now you can see the text field gets scrolled into view, so it's above the keyboard. We can still see what we're supposed to be typing in there. Precisely how we would have expected. So that is perhaps the simplest way that I know of to solve this problem, and it solves it pretty effectively. You can modify it if you need it to be modified. There are other ways of doing it as well, but this is perhaps the simplest way to do it without breaking everything in the process. Alright, so that pretty much does it for this video, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.